ultimately, without blaming key people, I mean, I'm not saying that the federation are not a culprit. It's the whole society. Us as African people, our consciousness needs to be elevated to a certain level where we see sports as one of the tools of economic development. And that's the thing. That is, in my opinion, that's the bottleneck.
Okay.
That is what is hindering the progress in sports in Africa.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because even if you could have the guys that are educated in Europe or the US coming on into Africa and coming with the right ideas and the right strategies and approach, but they will fail because the whole culture is not conducive for the development of sports. So it needs then that it has to be a ground up from what you call bottom up, not top, but a bottom up kind of strategy. But yes, driven at the top, but it has to be a process that actually incorporates all the key stakeholders in the ecosystem, and we try by all means to create value, right? And to empower the value chain, right? The media has got a role to play. The federation has got a role to play. The distributors have got a role to play. The community, the fans have got a role to play. And if we look at it from that holistic perspective, then African sports has got a chance. Europe has got about more than 100 years kind of chance to develop the sporting culture. In Africa, we're just beginning. We are still in the rudimentary stage. I'm not saying that's an excuse, but it's a fact.
Yeah.
We need to be conscious of, and the European way of doing this or the American way of doing this, it didn't just start from nowhere. The culture of professionalism started built up over time. And this is what we need to understand, that we need to build a culture of value creation and for economic development through sports.
All right.
That's how I think.
Okay, hey, that's a wonderful take, and obviously, as I was just nodding my head here in acceptance, in other words, of what you were saying. But what I gather from you, though, is the idea of building a culture, developing a culture. For me, I think that when you mentioned media. And this is why I feel media has a major role to play. What we're doing here today, we're talking about the issues. We're talking about why we need to bring value to sports as an industry. That's something that will help any nation build economic capacity around sports. I feel like the media has a significant role to play in that particular aspect. And we're not just talking about, because a lot of times when folks talk about sports media, they just think it's about reporting scores and stats and things like that. And that's where a lot of sports journalists are missing the point, especially in Africa, where they feel like talking about the English Premier League is the big deal,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leslie, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that as well. I mean, I've seen that over the years, is that when you go to conferences and things, the people who've done a bit of reporting on sport would be seen as, okay, you represent the media. And you can say, but hang on, what about television broadcasting? What about all the other aspects of media that comes into this picture? And there were never any broadcasters ever represented in any of these, on the forums and things like that, or in any opinions or people that were the media reps, as it were, for leagues and federations. There was nobody who knew anything about broadcasting. They were all just reporters that had come forward. But I just wanted to say that what you're saying about the media, I think, is quite key to what Temba was saying, because I think Temba's quite right in saying that, look, there's all aspects of society has a role to play in doing that. But I think that that what you were saying about the media. I think the media,
Mm-hmm.
someone has to start to get everybody activated, to everybody to play those roles. It's got to start somewhere.
Yes.
The sparks need to come to get the fire to burn.
Right.
And I think that's where media has a role to play. And I think media needs to be much more proactive, particularly as far as African sport is concerned, and doing more. To start lighting that fire with the sparks that they have, at their disposal.
Definitely.
I agree with you, Gray. I really agree with you on that. That there has to be some protagonist, some leader in this crusade. But at the same time, that leader requires all the other elements, all the other key stakeholders to be complementing whatever he's doing, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You were a super sport, and you did some great work in Nigeria, in Kenya, right? You did some good work even for Zuku, right? The media was ready to invest some money into producing local sports content. And what happened? The federation failed, right?
Yeah.
The federations were failing, and hence the sponsorships, when the sponsorship was not coming along. They were associating with those sports because of the administration part was failing. Now, what I'm not trying to say here is that we will need to have. We can just blame the federation, but we have to look at it from a holistic perspective, right? Because as much as the media is key, and from global case studies, and one which is much more prominent is the influence of Sky over the English Premier League, and it's prominent. The millions of pounds, or let's say the billions of pounds that have been pumped into the English Premier League by Sky, right, over the past 2 decades, have made this product to be what it is today. Okay, so there is no kind of denying that the media plays an integral role. But at the same time, the FA played a role, the clubs played a role, right? The government played a role. The government, because after the Hillsborough disaster, right? A commission was put in place. The Taylor report came after that commission, and the Taylor report made a series of recommendations that actually led to the Premier League to be where it is today. Okay? Let's not forget that the government played an integral role in actually putting in place regulations and putting in place structures that made sure that the product, right, the product of the Premier League is where it is today. So the FA played this role, the Premier League played this role, and the clubs, and the top 6 clubs played a role. At that time there were 4. The top 4 clubs played a role. Okay? The whole system had its own contradictions. There was resistance to change. There was resistance to the Taylor report. There was resistance even from the sponsors themselves. But that consciousness of that there is value in the English Premier League. All of us should come together and be on one table and work towards one single vision of making it the best football product in the world.
What I want to say about the media thing is but I'm not talking about the broadcast media, but I'm talking about the general media as well, in playing a role in helping to bring those elements all together, the different things together, and get that message out. And if you go back to Nigeria, if you look at it there in particular, is that where you find the media being so combative that sometimes there are good people in the FAs and in the leagues that come through and want to make things change and then do things, and the media then get into this very, very destructive mode and bring things down. And you think that so there's always this kind of fighting against things always. And there needs to be, the media can play a really positive role. They can get behind people, get behind certain administrations and help them, get a positive message out there.
Yeah.
It can make a huge difference,
Yeah, that's why I was actually driving it. That's the point I was actually driving it earlier, that the role of the media as it's seen, there's a conventional attitude towards the way the media is viewed and what it's supposed to be about, and what we think it ought to be. in other words, this catalyst for change, this set of individuals that are actually visionaries in the sense that they see the value in things and find a way to bring it out to the fore, to folks out there, explain it to them. Because the media is not just about reporting, it's also about educating. When you talk about how do you bring, when folks in the media get combative with other folks, I think they're really not getting the point. I think they're just playing a game. I think they're not understanding exactly their roles.
I agree sometimes.
Because I think if you're really about being the fourth estate, that's what you do. You hold people responsible for their actions, but at the same time, you also find ways to educate the public. You find ways to educate that individual, whoever the individual is that has an issue out there. So when we talk about educating the African public, across the continent about the value of what sports brings, from the very grassroots to the most sophisticated leagues across the continent, I think this is where, like I say, like we're all pretty much, I think, saying the same thing but from different angles. Yes, and I feel like educating the primary school teacher about, or the physical education teacher in the primary school to understand the value of what he's doing with the primary school students, to the coaches at the secondary school level, to the collegiate level. Of course, there's the collegiate level in Africa, that's something still, that's a big question, wholly other issue there by itself. To when we transition from that to the semi-pro, to the professional stage in the sports business, I think this is where a sports journalist ought to understand their role. That it's not just to go sit on the sidelines of a boxing ring or on the sidelines of a football pitch and report the news, which is what you do. Obviously, that's part of your job. But you ought to understand the inner workings of the business, and how can we transform what is happening to make it, count for people's efforts, because we're talking about careers. We're talking about making a living.
Yeah.
We're talking about putting food on the table, So,
I think a large account, often the media, what they do is go, rather they like to tend to focus on, it's the old thing about playing the man, not the ball. They, instead of trying to critique the issue and see what's fundamentally wrong, and try and understand it and unravel it, as it were. They always want to play the person behind it, as play the man, as it were, and because that's an easier target. He's the person responsible. Let's get him and saying, well, what is actually being done here? What's right? What's wrong? What do we need to change? What do we need to fix? That's what the issues are. And I think that's that kind of approach to try and sit back and say, how does what I do improve the situation?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about trying to kill this situation,
right,
and say this is wrong, flatten it. Basically, what I'm going to say is, if I'm going to engage with it and enter into it, so that how do I, if I go through this, will I kill it, or will I make it bigger and better, basically, and try and.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hello, I think we lost Gary. I think. Oh yeah, he's back.
Apologies about that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing. More positive engagement is kind of what I would like to that the media need to be aware of.
Okay.
But I totally agree with you. Yes, education, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would create a new perspective, a new consciousness that doesn't actually critique for the sake of critiquing, but maybe constructive criticism.
Right.
We need. It's here in developed sports market. That is there. But I think at the same time, we need to go beyond education. We need to go beyond rhetoric, right? Because rhetoric, to some extent, is still abstract. Okay, what we need to do is about action, right? The media has got to kind of walk the talk and then really get its hands dirty in actually partnering with federations and looking at sports properties in like local sports properties, local sports events that could that are sort of really low hanging fruit, that needs a little bit of investment, a little bit of capacity injection in production and in broadcasting.
Right.
right?
Right.
Mm.